My daughter-in-law texted me, "Stay away from us. We're better off without you." I stared at the screen, smiled, and replied with a single word. Okay. She thought she had just pushed me out of her life. What she didn't realize was that the house, the money, and every single rule under this roof belonged to me. Stay away from us. We're just better off without you. My daughter-in-law Clara didn't say it to my face. She texted it. The message popped up on my phone on a rainy Tuesday afternoon while I was sitting in my kitchen in Portland, sipping coffee. She was talking about me and my house, where she and my son Caleb had been living rent-free in the renovated upstairs apartment for the past 2 years. I stared at the screen. No tears, no shaking. At 64, you learn to see people exactly for who they are. Clara was ambitious, controlling, and mistook my quiet nature for weakness. Caleb was sitting right next to her. I knew it, keeping his mouth shut like he always did. I typed back a single word, okay? No long explanations, no accusations. That one word seemed to short-circuit something in Clara's brain. She was used to people defending themselves, used to me apologizing or trying to keep the peace. But I was done with that. I stood up, rinsed my coffee mug, and looked out the window at the manicured backyard. The house belonged to me. My late husband and I had paid cash for it. Caleb and Clara had moved into the top floor, ostensibly to save up for a down payment on a place of their own. Instead, they splurged on expensive vacations and new furniture, while I covered the utilities and the grocery bills almost entirely on my own. Slowly but surely, Clara had taken over the house, redecorating the living room, throwing out my plants, and treating me like an annoying house guest. That was over now. If you don't want me in your life, you don't get to benefit from my presence. I walked into the hallway, grabbed my jacket, and pulled the spare keys from the drawer. It was time for step 1. A faint noise from upstairs told me they were home, probably waiting for my emotional explosion. They'd be waiting a long time. I left the house and walked down the street to the local bakery. The wind was biting, but my head was completely clear. For 4 days, there was absolute radio silence in the house. Whenever we crossed paths in the stairwell, Clara pointedly looked away. Caleb stared at the floor, unable to look me in the eye. It hurt a little to see my own son act so spineless, but I held my ground. I stopped cooking for 3. I only bought groceries for myself. The expensive organic deli meats Clara used to quietly take from my fridge were no longer being bought. I put my own dishes in my private pantry and locked it. On Thursday evening, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Clara. "Can you send us $4,500? It's really important. The down payment for the new car is due, and the account is overdrawn. No, how are you?" No apology for the text from 4 days ago. She just needed cash, and to her, my bank account was a given. I sat on the couch, thinking about all the times I had bailed them out financially without ever hearing a thank you. Clara thought she could insult me and still claim my money. I typed my reply immediately without a second thought, saying, "Without me means being without my money too." The reaction was instantaneous. My phone practically blew up. Clara fired off one text after another. "You're so selfish. It's for your own son." "How can you leave us high and dry like this?" Caleb called 3 times. I didn't pick up. Instead, I silenced the phone, laid it face down on the kitchen table, and poured myself a glass of water. The silence that followed in my kitchen wasn't heavy. It was liberating. For the first time in years, I had taken back control of my own life and my finances. The top floor might be boiling, but my ground floor was a fortress of peace, The next morning, I went to Home Depot and bought new deadbolts for the front door and the basement. I didn't call a handyman. My husband had taught me how to use a screwdriver. Within an hour, the lock on the basement door was replaced. Down there sat the washer and dryer. Until now, Caleb and Clara had used my machines, used my detergent, and run up the electric bill on my meter. I locked them out. When Clara came down the basement stairs that afternoon with a basket of dirty laundry, she rattled the doorknob in vain. I stood in the kitchen doorway and watched her. "The key doesn't work," she said sharply. "What is this, Evelyn? I'm restructuring my household," I replied calmly. "Since you're better off without me, you should probably handle your laundry independently too. There's a laundromat downtown." Her face turned bright red. "This is childish. Caleb, get down here." Caleb came down the stairs visibly nervous. "Mom, come on. This is a little much. We live here together." "No, Caleb," I said, my voice firm. "You live on the top floor. Down here is my space. You wanted distance, you've got it." I walked back into the kitchen and shut the door behind me. No debates. Clara was ranting loudly in the hallway, but I turned on the radio and drowned out the noise. That evening, I heard them leave the house, probably heading over to Clara's parents to have a good cry. I used the quiet time to review my finances. I closed the joint savings account I had set up for Caleb years ago, the one he had never actually contributed to anyway. I transferred the funds to my private account. If you want to be independent, you have to deal with the consequences. On Monday, the tactics shifted. Clara stopped trying to confront me directly. Instead, she tried to hit me where she thought I was vulnerable, my routine. Every Monday, I brought in the mail and sorted the bills. When I went out to the mailbox, it was completely empty, even though I had just seen the mail carrier drive away. Clara had used her old spare key to grab everything first. I went upstairs and knocked on their door. Clara opened it, a triumphant smirk on her face. "The mail is for the whole house, Evelyn. I'll be sorting it from now on." "Give me my mail, Clara," I said calmly. "I don't have it handy right now. Maybe later." She went to shut the door, but I wedged my foot in the frame. I didn't shove the door open. I just held it in place. "You have exactly 3 seconds to hand over my mail," I said quietly with a coldness in my voice that caught her completely off guard. "Otherwise, tomorrow I'm rewriting the lease agreement and raising your utility fee to the legal maximum. And believe me, I know exactly how much electricity you're burning through upstairs." Her smirk vanished. She turned around, snatched a stack of letters off the entryway table, and threw them at my feet. I didn't bend down right away. I stared her down, waiting until she lowered her eyes, then slowly picked up the letters and walked back down the stairs. Among the mail was a notice from my bank. The automatic monthly transfer I used to send Caleb to help with his car payment had been canceled just as I'd requested. That was going to hit them even harder than the locked basement door. They had assumed my good nature was a bottomless well. Now they were realizing that every inch of ground they tried to take from me was going to cost them cold, hard cash. Midweek, I was out in the backyard pruning the roses. It was my sanctuary. Suddenly, the side gate clicked open and Clara's mother, Brenda, walked in. She wore that self-righteous accusatory look that some people put on when they're about to stick their noses into business that isn't theirs. "Evelyn," she began without beating around the bush. "What I'm hearing's honestly heartbreaking. Clara is crying herself to sleep every night. You can't treat the kids like this. You're a family." I set my shears down and stood up. I didn't offer her a seat, and I didn't shake her hand. "Brenda, did you actually read the text your daughter sent me?" She was stressed. Brenda defended her instantly. People say things they don't mean in the heat of the moment. Clara wasn't stressed. She was being honest, I countered. She doesn't want me here, and I've respected her wish. If they're having financial issues, that's your department now. You're more than welcome to loan them that $4,500. Brenda swallowed hard. Apparently, she didn't have that kind of money lying around either, or she just didn't want to part with it. That's completely different. You live in the same house as them. This house belongs to me alone, I said, clearly. Caleb and Clara live here as guests who act like landlords. That ends now. And now I'm going to ask you to leave my property. I have work to do. Brenda snorted in indignation, spun on her heel, and stormed off. That evening, I heard a loud argument echoing from the top floor. Clara was furious at her mother for failing to accomplish anything, and furious at Caleb for still doing nothing. Meanwhile, I sat in my armchair reading a book. The walls of my house kept the noise far away from me. I was no longer the understanding mother who forgave everything. I was the owner who set the rules. On Friday, I put my plan into action. I didn't call any authorities. I simply exercised my rights as a landlord. Since Caleb and Clara's old agreement stated they had to pay a share of the operating costs, a share I had generously rounded down for years, I drew up the first itemized bill they'd seen in 2 years. I listed every single expense: trash pickup, property taxes, HVAC servicing, and their actual water usage, which was easy to calculate based on the number of people. I left the envelope at the top of the stairs. The back pay amounted to just under $1,800, due within 2 weeks. It took less than 10 minutes for Caleb to knock on my kitchen door. He looked pale. "Mom, what is this $1,800? We don't have that kind of money. You know that." Clara already ordered the new car. "Then she needs to cancel the order, Caleb," I said, pouring myself some tea. "You've gotten so cold," he said quietly, disappointment clouding his eyes. "You never would have done this before." "Before I believed that you two respected me," I answered, looking him dead in the eye. "But your wife put it in writing that you're better off without me. If you want to be independent, you have to foot the entire bill for your life. I'm done subsidizing your lifestyle while being treated like an inconvenience." Caleb fell silent. He had no counter-argument. He knew I was legally and morally in the right. He took the bill and slowly walked back upstairs. Shortly after, I heard Clara's voice screeching from the upper floor, but this time, she didn't sound triumphant. She sounded panicked. Her house of cards, built on arrogance and borrowed money, was collapsing at the seams, and she had no plan B. Because the top floor was technically rented out, I didn't step foot up there. But the attic and the garage belonged to me according to the agreement. For months, Clara had blocked the garage with her old furniture and storage tubs, forcing my car to sit out in the rain. On Saturday morning, I opened the garage door. I hauled every single one of Clara's boxes out and stacked them neatly but completely exposed right outside the basement door in the courtyard. Then I pulled my car inside and locked the garage. Clara came running out in her bathrobe when she heard the commotion. "What do you think you're doing?" "My stuff is sitting out in the elements." "It's not raining, Clara." "Not yet," I said, calmly locking up the garage. "The garage is mine. I need the space for my vehicle. You can store your things in your own living quarters or rent a storage unit." "You're ruining us," she practically screamed. "First the money, then the laundry, now this. I'm not ruining you. I'm just removing myself from your life exactly like you asked," I replied. "You're better off without me. So handle your problems without me. Caleb walked up and started trying to lift the heavy boxes. He looked exhausted. Clara nagged at him to do something, but he just shook his head. For the first time, I saw Caleb starting to look at the situation realistically. He looked at his wife and finally realized that her pride had landed them in this mess. I went back inside, locked the door, and made myself a late breakfast. My car was dry in the garage. Things were settling into their proper place. The following Monday, I noticed fine scratch marks around the deadbolt of my ground floor apartment door. Clara had obviously tried to have a duplicate key made, hoping to sneak in while I was out to look for my bank statements or the original lease. She severely underestimated my attention to detail. I didn't waste any time. I went straight to the local locksmith and bought a high-security, unbumpable lock for my door. I installed it myself that very afternoon. When I finished, I tested the key. It turned perfectly. When Clara got home from work that evening, I heard her pause outside my door. She tried to insert her old key, but it wouldn't even fit into the slot. I heard her sharp, angry gasp through the wood. She knocked loudly. I didn't open it. I didn't even get up. I had nothing left to say to her. My ground floor was now completely severed from her world. They had the top floor that was their space. Everything else was mine. This physical barrier brought immense psychological relief. I no longer had to worry about her snooping through my things when I wasn't home. She was locked out from my space and from my life. Caleb sent me a text, "Mom, why did you change the lock?" I didn't reply. Some questions answer themselves if you just replay the last few weeks in your head. The 2-week deadline for the utility bill arrived. It was a Thursday. No money had hit my account. I expected as much. But instead of complaining or issuing idle threats, I took the direct, practical route. I shut off the hot water valve to the upstairs apartment located in the basement behind my newly locked door. It was entirely within my rights, as they were in default of payment, and I was under no obligation to keep fronting their utility costs. The results didn't take long. Within 30 minutes, Caleb came downstairs. He knocked very softly on my door. I opened it. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "The water upstairs is freezing. Clara is in the middle of a shower." I know I said, "The utility bill is past due as of today. I can no longer advance the cost of the gas to heat your water. We'll pay you. I promise," he pleaded. "I told Clara we have to cancel the car order." She agreed. "Please just turn the water back on." I looked past him up the stairs. Clara was standing at the top railing wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping and covered in shampoo. She didn't look proud anymore. She looked defeated. The arrogance had completely drained from her face. She finally understood that her words carried real consequences. "Caleb," I said calmly, "when the cash for the bill is sitting on my kitchen table, I'll turn the valve back on. Not a second before." Caleb turned, went upstairs, and had a hushed, frantic conversation with Clara. Then he came back down and handed me an envelope full of cash. It was the money meant for the car down payment. I took the envelope, counted it thoroughly, and nodded. "Good. I'll turn the valve." 3 weeks later, Caleb and Clara were packing their boxes into a U-Haul. They had realized that living in my house under my terms was no longer the free ride they had envisioned. Clara couldn't handle the complete lack of control, and Caleb couldn't take the pressure anymore. They had rented a small apartment on the outskirts of town, more expensive, much smaller, and lacking any of the luxuries of my house. I stood by the window, watching them load up the truck. Caleb came into the ground floor one last time to say goodbye. He was alone. Clara was already sitting in the cab of the truck. "I'm sorry for how everything went down, Mom," he said, looking at his shoes. Me too. Caleb, I answered honestly, but you need to take charge of your own life. And you need to learn how to set boundaries just like I did. He gave a sad nod, gave me a brief hug, and walked out. As the truck pulled out of the driveway, I didn't feel any sadness. I felt a deep, comforting wave of relief. The house was empty again. It was my house again. I went upstairs into the vacated apartment. They had left it clean. They had to because I was holding on to their security deposit until I inspected every square inch. I opened the windows to let out the stagnant air of the past few months. The afternoon sun streamed through the glass, bright and clear, illuminating the empty rooms. I wouldn't rent the top floor out again. Maybe I'd turn it into a craft room or a library for my books. I walked back downstairs, settled into my armchair, and bathed in the absolute, uninterrupted silence. I hadn't needed lawyers' screaming matches or underhanded mind games. A simple, okay, and firm control over what was rightfully mine had been more than enough to put my life back in order. The cycle of being taken for granted was broken, and it felt wonderful.